let's get to the other thing that I wanted to have the whole show essentially be about. We are in the last year before we have a college football playoff. Something that I was born in 1976. So my entire lifetime, I have been a college football fan. When I was a kid growing up in Orange, California, my favorite team, I kid you not, was the Oklahoma Sooners. I don't know why. I just love the Sooners. I love the wishbone. I love their brashness. I love their speed. And it seemed like every year they go to the Orange Bowl and they get beaten by Miami. Right? That's what usually happened. And I hated Miami growing up, and I loved Oklahoma. And then my sister was a cheerleader at UCLA, and I became a UCLA football fan as well. And then I went to Notre Dame for a year. I like Notre Dame football. I never went kind of all in on the Domers. And I'll tell you, I actually shared with a friend. This is when I knew I found the school that fit me. When I was at Notre Dame, on my visit, they lost on a last-second field goal in 1994 to Michigan. It was a great football game. Awesome. They had just beat Northwestern, Ron Paulus's second game as a starting quarterback, and they lost on I'm going to say 48, 50-yard field goal to Michigan at home. And I remember walking back, and everybody was crying. And then my first game as a student, they actually lost to Northwestern in 1995. That was the Northwestern team that went to the Rose Bowl. But at the time, you lost to Northwestern. It was like the world was ending, and everybody was crying. And I was like, why are we crying? It was a good football game. It just lost a game. My first year at Oklahoma State, this is in 1997. They beat Oklahoma for the first time at home in 26 years, and they tore down the goalpost. And I was watching the thing. I was at the game, and I'm crying like a baby. And it was the first time I felt connected with the team that was playing on the field. So my alma mater is playing tomorrow. They're 15.5-point dogs. No one thinks they belong on the same field as Texas. Texas is trying to make a point, leaving it for the SEC. Their athletic budget is 2.5 times that of Oklahoma State. Their NIL budget is at least 3 times that of Oklahoma State. They got dudes, and they've lost Oklahoma State 8 out of the last 10 times they've played, and they're playing in Texas. In Jerry's world, the place is going to be a sea of bright and burnt orange. Right? And it does not appear on paper, it appears to be a complete mismatch. But there's also the element of things that don't make sense. Okay? Oregon plays Washington tonight in Las Vegas. Washington beat Oregon. Now, again, I understand home field and home court advantage. It's massive, and I like the fact that you get to play a team twice. But think about this for a second. Oregon lost that game by a touchdown. Could have been 2. Washington, I don't know if you remember, they dropped the ball running into the end zone. Would have been another score. But regardless of which, Washington won the game. It was a great game in the Pacific Northwest. Both teams are going to the Big Ten next year. So all Washington has done is win every game on their schedule. They played one Power 5 out of conference. They played Michigan State, who's not particularly good. They played them at home. Oregon went to Texas Tech. Could have lost that game, by the way, in Lubbock. Ends up winning. Oregon, since that game, has been spectacular. Spectacular. But if Oregon beats Washington, even though they would have split the season series, Oregon is likely to go to the national semifinal, right? Based upon what we think now. Texas beat Alabama at Alabama. Let me not stutter on that one. Beat Alabama at Alabama. They did lose to Oklahoma in Dallas, Red River game. Again, if you watch the game, probably should have won it, but they didn't. If they beat Oklahoma State, they will have won the Big 12, lost only one game, beaten Alabama and Alabama, which is a better win than anything anyone else has. There's Florida State beat LSU, but that was neutral site. Okay. Georgia there's no one on the road that they've played that equates to Alabama, even though they could beat Alabama on Saturday. Michigan, you could maybe make the case because they won at Penn State, right? But Penn State is not at Alabama. Texas literally has the best win of the year. And it was a no-doubter. And Alabama, it wasn't like they were missing their quarterback. Wasn't like they had massive injuries. Okay, nothing. They just went in and whooped their ass. And they could have the same record as Oregon and not go. The same record as Alabama if Alabama beats Georgia and not go. They beat Alabama at Alabama. They lost the same number of games to an arch rival, and Oklahoma's good. You know, they're not great. They're not terrible. They're good. Like, what, 9-2 in the year? Is that what they finished, or 10-2 in the year? Like, this system has never made sense, never been equitable, and in the last year, we have a chance for complete chaos. And though I don't usually root for it, I am especially rooting for it. Because everybody knows that as good as Florida State is, they beat LSU way back when. The ACC stinks, okay? It stinks. And their best player isn't going to play for them tomorrow and isn't going to play for them in the semis or the finals. And we could say, well, Ohio State did the same thing, was that 6-7 years ago? Yeah, the difference is Ohio State was stacked. And then, after losing their quarterback, they went out and beat the living crap out of everybody in their way. Then they beat Wisconsin. Like, I'm not looking at the scores. It's like 51-3. It was one of those, like,
59-0.
Yeah, it was something embarrassing. It was like, oh, my God. Okay, now, Florida State survived Florida. They may be throwing out a third-string quarterback. And the idea that Florida State, who beat LSU in August, goes undefeated in the worst of the Power 5 leagues by a mile. By a mile, that league is not nearly what the other ones are. And like Texas, and again, everyone knows I'm a Big 12 guy. I'm an Oklahoma State alum. I have no affinity for Texas. But, dude, Texas wrecked the Big 12 outside of the Oklahoma game, rivalry game, lost in a close one. And they beat Alabama and Alabama. So here's the thing I'm rooting for. Complete and utter chaos. All right? I want Oregon to beat Washington. I want Louisville to beat Florida State. I want Bama to beat Georgia. I want Texas. I don't really want them to beat Oklahoma State, but if they do beat Oklahoma State, I want all that. I want all those one-loss teams so that nothing makes sense at all. Because this system, believe it or not, is actually better than the system they had for 50 years, bowl games, or better than the system they had for 20 years with the BCS. And as a celebration of the end of things that don't make sense, we'll go to a playoff next year after this year being complete and utter chaos. Everybody okay with that? That's my plan. Vote for Doug Gottlieb. By the way, this is a real thing. Ohio State won the national championship. What year was that, Buyer? I'm sorry.
2014.
I mean, again, I'm only asking Dan, not just because he knows he's an avid Ohio State fan. Okay. And if you went back, I was doing national radio at the time. I said they shouldn't go to the college football playoff. I didn't believe they deserved it. And they won anyway. And it's a lot like the NCAA tournament. Like, people think because you don't belong in the tournament, that means that you are going to lose games in the tournament. Those two things don't actually equate. Right? They don't equate. But they did. They won every game. They're like, oh, yeah, we lost. Cardale Jones comes in and has 3 incredible games. Yes.
And I was just going to say, to add on to that, I think there are lasting effects of that. Number one, they were a different team at the beginning of the year because J.T. Barrett had to fill in for Braxton Miller, and they lost at home to an unranked Virginia Tech team, kind of like Alabama losing at home, although to a Texas team. But now, for Florida State's case, even if they would have a third-string quarterback because of what Cardale Jones did against Wisconsin, you almost need Florida State to do that against Louisville tomorrow to end up enhancing their chances.
And, like, Louisville's a cool story. Like, Jeff Brom's done a really good job in short order turn that thing around. But, like, Louisville lost at home to Kentucky last week. Like, they're just okay. That the ACC is just not at the level of the rest. So I don't know what we're doing here.